Welcome everyone to this evening's event. My name is Jim Brennan, the president of Berkeley School of Theology. Before we begin this program, I want to take a moment for us to acknowledge the events of the last 12 days unfolding in Israel-Palestine, the birthplace of our Lord, for whom the Apostle Paul called who came preaching peace, who is our peace. Will you pray with me? Lord of peace, God of peace, we pray for the people of Palestine and Israel in these perilous and dangerous times. For those who are fleeing, sanctuary. For those who are staying, safety. For those who have been wronged, justice. For those who are fearful, assurance. For those in despair, encouragement. For those who are grieving, comfort. For those who are wounded, healing. For those who have died, rest. For those who are leading, wisdom. For those who are fighting, peace. We ask all this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our peace. Amen. Amen. It's a delight to have you here this evening. So good to see so many faces. We're so tired of Hollywood squares for so many years, and so have these kind of events is just quite emotional for all of us. It's truly an honor to be together this evening. Thank you for coming in person, and for all of you who are on Zoom, we welcome you as well. I want to especially acknowledge a few people this evening. First of all, of course, the Honorable Judge Gail Bereola, who will be introduced more fully in a few minutes. I also want to recognize Reverend Dr. J.Alfred Smith Sr., who is with us virtually, of whom is BST's first ever endowed chair is named after Dr. Smith's lifelong ministry as Professor Emeritus here at BST, Pastor Emeritus of Allen Temple Baptist Church, and for Dr. Smith's influential leadership locally, nationally, and internationally. There's a fun fact that I just recently found out from Dr. Smith, that he and Reverend Bernstein, who I believe is also with us this evening, virtually, were married in your home, I heard. So that's if you ever ask that question, there's your trivia response. I also want to recognize especially our board members, but first of all, I want to make sure I recognize Dr. David Beatty, social psychologist extraordinaire from Denver, Colorado, who's been our chair now for 9 years. Dr. Beatty, thank you for coming this evening. We also have present former board chair, Reverend Dr. Jim Hopkins, I thought I saw. There he is back there. Welcome. And all other board members, will you just stand and acknowledge yourself this evening? We have some other board members in the room. Thank you. And I also want to welcome a delightful, I wouldn't mind being a judge in Judge David Kroshna's courtroom. It's good to have you here, friend of Judge Bereola. Dr. Fania Davis, I believe, is here, and Dr. Tayasha Bankhead, Executive Director and CEO of Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, and I believe Fania was the former Executive Director of the same program and founding director. So it's good to have both of you with us as well as so many others as well. I'll take a moment just to have our faculty stand as well, because we have a faculty to die for. And we have others who aren't here as well. Well, one of the foundational texts in the Torah, undergirding the whole of the Hebrew Bible, or the Older Testament, the prophets, the ministry of Jesus, the Gospels. Indeed, this institution, since its founding in 1871, is the passage found in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verse 20. Justice, justice, you shall pursue. This justice thing is hard work, isn't it? It's not always easy to do the right thing. Sometimes justice, for some, is not viewed to be so by others. And so this evening, we enter the profound but murky waters of criminal justice reform, because much too often we embrace retributive forms of justice rather than seeking new paradigms of restorative and distributive justice, of which we'll hear more about this evening. We are also all too ready to assign blame instead of proactively prioritizing and working to prevent future harm. We want punishment, even vengeance, instead of focusing on systemic causes for injustice. And so we need the counsel of wise and seasoned and righteous jurists, like our guest speaker this evening, to help us to pursue what is right and just for all. A justice that leads to peace, true peace, the shalom, salam of God. But before Judge Bereola speaks to us, I want to give the floor over to Reverend Dr. Joseph Evans, professor of the J.Alfred Smith Endowed Chair of Theology and Public Square, and the director of BST's Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice, a name that we borrowed, of course, from our own board member who's unable to be with us this evening, Representative Barbara Lee. That's her inspiration, the title of that center. Prior to coming to BST this past spring, Dr. Evans served as Dean of Morehouse School of Religion, and before that, senior pastor and preacher of the historic Mount Carmel Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. He has a BA, an MDiv, a PhD, and is the author of several books, a slew of articles. He's a popular professor, a very popular recruiter, that is to the seminary. I don't know about the military, but popular recruiter, professor, university lecturer, and preacher of international renown. He enjoys sports, bicycling, and jazz. And it's a pleasure to have you come and speak for a few minutes with us. Thank you.
Well, it is my pleasure to stand before you for these very few brief minutes. We have very special guests we need to hear, but I am very privileged to be with you as the new director of the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. This is a stellar evening. You are making it so by your presence here tonight. I would like to pause for a moment and recognize some of the people who made this possible, which would be our staff, in the persons of, you've heard Dr. Angela Jackson's name. She's the Vice President of Institutional Advancement here, but she did not do this by herself. She had others to help her. Leah Rochelle is here. Melissa is with us. Would you please wave at the people that, Sam Hilder is here. Where's Samuel? Who am I missing in that respect? Is that most of you? And so I would like for you to give them a hand for putting this all together. Valerie Watson is the CFO here at our institution. However, she also enjoys making sure that we have the kinds of, if I could borrow a Southern word for you, the victuals we've enjoyed here tonight. Vaughn, I know you're here somewhere. Would you just kind of let everybody see you? There she is back there. And I must say that the food is very good, and we compliments to the chef, and we're very, very pleased. A very quick house note. If anyone needs to use a restroom, the door where Dr. Angela is standing, you go directly out of that door, go into the building next, and on your left is restrooms. And so do that, please. Now, what I'll ask you to do is, should you need to leave when our speaker is speaking, it is really hard to speak when people are moving around. And so if Judge Bereola is speaking to us, even if you have a seat up front, just stay in the back. It's much harder for her to be able to deliver this for us tonight. Indeed, I was the dean at the Morehouse School of Religion in Atlanta, and I got a call from a person whose name I will not mention, and had mentioned to me the endowed chair here at Berkeley. I saw the advertisement, but did not apply. Didn't think that I would necessarily be a fit at that time, and there were other reasons why I didn't do that. But I did get a call twice from a person and urging me to apply, and I said, well, when is the time to apply? And I think it was in the next couple of days, and I said, I don't have the advertisement. He sent it to me, and that's when I said, well, when do you need it back? So I need it back in 48 hours. And so I had to hustle up and write it. But when I looked at the profile, it was rather easy for me to write because I felt that some of the skill sets that I had and those experiences and passions that I had built upon over the years may have made me compatible with Berkeley School of Theology. And not only being the endowed chair that holds the name of the esteemed J.Alfred Smith, which is enough to attract anyone to want to come and be a part of this program. But it was also the work that is before us. The Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice, as our president so eloquently said to us, represents three different obvious words, phrases that could stand alone. The first one being truth. We're in pursuit of truth, where we may be able to uncover and to pursue truth. Secondly, racial healing, I think, is obvious that if truth is to be told, our nation, in fact our world, is in need of racial healing. And without racial healing, it will be very difficult for the next word I want to use, and that is reconciliation. I do not wish to go into depth on that because Judge Bereola will deal with the restorative justice process. But for those of you who are interested in the biblical aspect, at least in the book of 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul does a wonderful job of explaining the different aspects of what reconciliation is. I'll give you a hint. He sees it as a legal term. And so I would expect that you would like to think about that. The center is built on 4 A's. And in an academic institution, everybody wants to make an A, and so you all are paying attention, aren't you? Although I don't know why I'm here. I've rarely made an A, but here I am. The first A is alignment. The center must be aligned with the mission and vision, the values, and the strategic plan of Berkeley School of Theology at large, which suggests to us that there may be some things that we can't do if they are contradict or impose in a way upon our institution at large. However, that does not mean that we cannot help people reach those aspirations and goals. And so we are aligned with the Berkeley School of Theology at large. The second A is awareness. Now, I wanted to use Barbara Lee's word woke, but I wanted to stay with the A's. But it is to be woke. We want to be woke here. And by that, we're looking to locate the intersections between ethical and unethical issues in the day, realities in our day. We like to look at, in fact, if you have this, what we call a buck slip on your table, if you would lift that up, it would give you some idea of what we're talking about. We are interested in activities such as initiatives globally. For example, we are in partnership with people in Rwanda. We're building relationships with people in Brazil, and we're also in South Africa. We are also working with the Sentencing Project in Washington. In fact, if you would, their report came out just today that demonstrates that we have a long way to go in the equity of over-policing, or as they call it, extreme policing these days. And so I would think that that would be of interest to you. Also, reparations here locally. We've had the privilege of working with some of the individuals who are here now who are representatives of the California Commission on Reparations. And we are grateful for their expertise here globally. We're interested in Hayward, where obviously at some point in the past, both browns and blacks were evacuated in a gentrification effort. Equally in Oakland, both in East and West Oakland, there is a great deal of work we can do, not to lead the way, but to be a support to local leaders who have those issues well in hand. And then we have symposiums, and you see in speaker events. And by the way, there's another advertisement on your table, and you may see that if you look all the way to May of 2024, the Honorable Ambassador Andrew Young will be with us to be our commencement graduation speaker, and we look forward to him coming. And if you go to April of 2024, you see that William Darity and Kirsten Mullen, who are the authors of From Here to Equality, and they will speak to us on the issues of reparations. And of course, tonight is a major event for us, and I'm not going to say any more than that, but we're really grateful that Judge Gail Bereola is with us here tonight. The final A's are agency. We want to be a catalyst to help people meet their objectives and goals in many of the different aspects of the restorative justice process. And then finally, access. I think our center can provide access to people in the community, partner also with other like communities, sister communities like other American Baptist institutions, other seminaries, other colleges, where as we build what we call a canon of information, and tonight we're building the canon of information, we'll be able to share that with our sister institutions to build a larger footprint across the work. And so finally, if you would, the buck slip demonstrates that there is a scan code here, and if you would like to support the center, please take time to use that. We certainly would welcome and thanking you in advance. Our total group of preachers who were here in September, pastors, and we had several of them here, and I said to them, hey, look, if you would just give $1 by scanning this scan code, then we would be able to enter you into our database, which helps us later. And that fact, you would help us later. We would have you in our database that suggests to any large funder, whether it is the Lilly or other grant writing institutions, that would help us demonstrate that we have people who are supporting us. But I found out that you can't give $1, but you can give $5. And so those of us tonight, I don't want to use my Baptist preacher trick, but I did go across the room and look at some of the shoes that some of you are wearing, purses that you are carrying, and some of the other accessories that have come with you to this meeting. I have assessed, Mr. President, that everyone can't afford $5. And so if you would kindly do that, we would be appreciative of that. The final thing I don't think we did do is to acknowledge that we have students here, and we also have students who are watching us by Zoom. Kara Gosh, who is the executive director of the Sentencing Project, is watching us from Washington, D.C. My wife is watching us tonight. Hello, Patricia. And others. And so we welcome you here to the Berkeley School of Theology, where we are now prepared to decolonize theological education. And with that, I would like now to save the best for last, at least for me, and that is to reintroduce the president of the Berkeley School of Theology, who I must say I'm very impressed with. I enjoy his company and learning from him and gleaning from him. Dr. Brenneman is really the brain trust behind this chair. that I have the privilege to occupy. When the large philanthropic gift was presented to this institution, I'm sure there were other needs, frankly, that he could have placed these dollars in, but because of his ethical and moral position on racial healing and restorative justice, Dr. Brenneman made certain that this chair is endowed. That's just a small portion of who our president is. He's a visionary leader, and without any further ado, again, in this time, would you please just demonstrate your appreciation for Dr. James Brenneman, the president of Berkeley School of Theology.
Wow, and now I get to do one of my favorite things. I wish I could do this for the rest of the night, is introduce one of our faculty members. I could spend the rest of the night introducing you to each and every one of them who have amazing resumes. But tonight I have the privilege of introducing Reverend Dr. Valerie Miles Tribble. Dr. Tribble also serves as the faculty rep on our board. She's the professor of ministerial leadership and practical theology. Dr. V has a BA, 2 masters, and 2 doctoral degrees, with a book and numerous articles and lectures in her portfolio. She's a leading womanist scholar, an organizational leadership guru with a business and marketing background, a popular professor here at BST, and with our sister schools of the Graduate Theological Union. She recently received the Distinguished Faculty Lecture Award at the Graduate Theological Union, and that is voted on by her peers and other students and everyone else. She's a local pastor as well. If you want someone who turns theory into practice every day and all the time, Dr. Miles Tribble is your teacher, preacher, and professor. Welcome, Dr. Valerie.
Thank you, Dr. JB. That was very kind. I am indeed honored this evening to have the opportunity to introduce the Honorable Gail Brewster Bereola. Now, her bio is on your table. And as they say in the church, we're certain that all of you can read along. And so I am not going to read the bio in its entirety, but just to highlight in some places. I also want to note that the first line of the bio says that the Honorable Gail Brewster Bereola was a public servant and active judicial officer for over 31 years. I would like to make that is a public servant, because she is still serving and leading in our community. She graduated from law school in 1979 and began her legal career as a licensed lawyer in April 1980. In 1991, she was appointed as a court commissioner to the Oakland-Piedmont Emeryville Municipal Court in Oakland, California. In 1992, she was appointed as a judge to the Oakland-Piedmont Emeryville Municipal Court by then Governor Pete Wilson. And in 1998, she was elevated to the Superior Court of California County of Alameda. Judge Bereola retired from active judicial service on December 31st, 2022. And most of you, if you have retired, you know that the work does not stop. That's why I say is an active public servant. Before her appointment to the bench, Judge Bereola was a prosecutor in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office and later was an attorney and principal in the private law practice of Hardy and Hardy in Oakland, California. And as an active judge, Judge Bereola served in various leadership roles as assistant presiding judge and presiding judge of the municipal court. She served as supervising judge 1998 to 2000 of the Superior Court, and as presiding judge of the Juvenile Court, 2006 to 2010. She's also been active in her community and church. And so, as many of you know, because many of you here are representing, Judge Bereola is an active member of Allen Temple Baptist Church for over 30 years. She is a member of Allen Temple's Business and Professional Women's Society and has served as its parliamentarian. She served as both the chair and co-chair of the Persons with Disabilities Ministries and has served as faculty for the Leadership Institute. Now, in 2008, Judge Bereola convened the Alameda County Restorative Juvenile Justice Task Force, and she collaborated with Alameda County juvenile justice partners and community-based organizations to develop and implement a 3-year strategic plan aimed at institutionalizing restorative justice practices and processes in the county schools and juvenile system. So when we hear from Judge Bereola this evening, in addition to her international work, her local impact on our community makes her an expert that we must hear. She's often called upon to speak as a keynote speaker or panelist on various topics involving the law, restorative justice, overcoming adversity, implicit bias, disability rights, and other topics. And so throughout her legal career, which spans over 42 years, Judge Bereola has received numerous awards and commendations and recognition for her work in the law and in the community, many of which are listed in the bio, so I will not read them all. Now, in 2014, Judge Bereola was named and honored as the Trial Judge of the Year by the Alameda Contra Costa Trial Lawyers Association. And I am sure that that was no easy feat. And so you definitely are deserving of that honor. In 2016, she was honored with the Ubuntu Award for Outstanding Contributions to Restorative Justice by Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. And in 2022, she was named Woman Jurist of Distinction by the Women's Lawyers of Alameda County, and as a Woman in Leadership, Changing the World Award recipient by Mission College of Santa Clara, California. So as you can see, this is the reason that I say is instead of was. Judge Bereola is still intricately involved with many active roles, and we are indeed honored to hear from her this evening. Justice Gail Brewster Bereola.
And so, once again, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see all of you here this evening. And I appreciate your being here for this fall presentation by the Berkeley School of Theology and the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. As you have heard, I am Gail Brewster Bereola. I am a former judge of the Alameda County Superior Court, and I served on that court for approximately, well, actually a little bit over 31 years. I also want to give my thanks to Dr. Evans, Joseph Evans, who serves as the Dr. J.Alfred Smith Senior Professor of Theology in the Public Square, and who is currently serving as the the director, that is, of the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice, for inviting me to speak and be your featured speaker this evening. In addition to that, I want to thank Dr. Jim Brenneman, who is the president of the Berkeley School of Theology, and Dr. Leanne Flesher, vice president of academics, and I believe dean of the faculty. I also express my gratitude to everyone who was involved in making this night possible, and for me to be able to be here this evening to be able to present to you. I don't know what just happened, but okay. Yeah, that's It just went off. It got dark and then went out. I'm not sure why. So anyway, it's a good thing that I brought my hard copy because you never know what's going to happen. Yeah. So in addition, I also want to thank and express my gratitude to Reverend Dr. J.Alfred Smith Sr., who is watching this evening. He is a former professor at the Berkeley School of Theology. He's a former senior pastor, as you've heard, of the Allen Temple Baptist Church, and currently he is the pastor emeritus of Allen Temple. I want to thank him for his decades of godly and radical leadership in the public square. Dr. Smith continues to be an inspiration to many of us, and also to me. And it is fitting, I think, that his example of leadership and inspiration over the years led to the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice being named after him. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank members of my Allen Temple Baptist Church family, as well as my personal family and friends, my colleagues. One of the judges who is still my colleague is here this evening, and I appreciate that. I don't know if I should tell you, but actually I invited a number of other judges, but tonight we are having a judges reunion at the Claremont Country Club. And I had actually RSVP'd for that and then found out when I had previously agreed that I would speak. And then I found out that the date was actually going to be tonight, which conflicts. So they're over there partying and having a good time, and I'm over here speaking. But thank you, Judge Krashna, for being here this evening. And do you mind bringing my glass of water, please? Thank you. Thank you. Again, thank you for the opportunity, and I am honored to present to you tonight. For a country that is just 4.4% of the global population, United States citizens comprise 22% of the world's prison population. Indeed, in America, the so-called land of the free, our government spends more on incarcerating its citizens in prisons and jails than it does on educating our children. According to a report by the U.S. Department of Education, there are 15 states that spend at least $27,000 more per prisoner than for a student's education. California is by far the worst, spending only approximately $11,500 per student annually versus $64,642 per prisoner annually. Statistics show that in the United States, crime rates have fallen over the past 3 decades, yet incarceration rates have more than tripled. In fact, California spends $8.6 billion annually on its prison industrial complex, more than any other state in the United States. You can see that the prison industrial complex is a booming business. It's big business. Approximately 66% of state prison inmates have not graduated from high school, and young Black and brown men aged 20 to 24 without a high school diploma are more likely to be incarcerated in jail or prison than they are likely to have a job. Recidivism rates in the United States are among the highest in the world, with almost 44% of persons released from prison returning to prison within their first year out. According to a 2012 report of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, more than 65% of individuals released from prison in California reoffend and return to prison within 3 years of being released. There is something very, very wrong with that picture, and it highlights the need for alternatives that address the underlying issues that lead to criminal behavior. With that as a backdrop, I want to talk to you tonight about restorative justice as a new, but not so new, paradigm for criminal justice reform. Although it is not a panacea, I believe that restorative justice can be utilized as an alternative to address these concerns and improve and augment our current retributive justice system. In some instances, restorative justice, and throughout the evening, you'll hear me refer to it as RJ as well, for short, is already being used in a wide range of contexts to address, with good results, youth crime, in proactive community building, by communities to respond to incidents of hate and intolerance, by departments of correction as an alternative to traditional probation and supervision, by faith-based organizations as a ministry to their communities, by medical professionals to address disparities in healthcare, by schools for behavior intervention, and by police departments to further community policing. As a judge for more than 31 years, and as a prosecutor, defense attorney, and a lawyer with the Judge Advocate General's Corps of the United States Army Reserve for almost 12 years before that, I have had the opportunity to work within the criminal, juvenile, and military justice systems quite extensively. I have seen firsthand how our retributive justice system works, and over the years, I have become increasingly dismayed, concerned, and disturbed about our retributive justice system. I have come to view the retributive justice system as a cold and impersonal process that fails to allow or enable offenders who want to take real responsibility for the harms they have caused, and a system that fails victims whose needs go largely unaddressed. And although over recent years court programs have been introduced to try to change this, it is still common that victims are not empowered, offenders are not accountable and not rehabilitated, and neither victims nor offenders are restored to wholeness. There is no healing, and harm is not repaired. And while I believe that exacting punishment by removal of an offender from society for the protection of the public can be an appropriate consequence for commission of serious crime, and I have certainly sent my share of people to jail and prison over the years, that should not be the only consequence that results from our system of justice. Because the fact of the matter is that most offenders will return to their communities after serving a period of incarceration. If they have not been rehabilitated, and if the root causes of their criminality have not been addressed, if there are no programs that help restore them while they are incarcerated, and no programs to help support their reintegration when they are released, what do you think eventually happens? Yes, before long, most will recidivate and return to jail or prison, having committed more serious crimes, and the revolving door, which has become a cornerstone of our retributive system of justice, continues. Over the years, I have decided that I would work within the system as a judge to try to change and improve it. As I have educated myself and learned more about restorative justice, I've had the opportunity to see firsthand how restorative justice works. I've heard the stories of individual victims and victim impact panels and have witnessed their pain as well as their reclamation of their power as survivors of crime, harm, and wrongdoing. I have listened to the stories of victimizing by incarcerated lifers at San Quentin Prison and have witnessed them connect the dots regarding the root causes of their criminal behavior, which allowed them to feel and express true remorse and empathy, and to take responsibility for their actions. I've also witnessed victims forgive their offenders and offenders forgive themselves during restorative processes. I have seen them move forward empowered to live productive and meaningful lives. Isn't that what we all want? To be empowered to live meaningful and productive lives and to positively contribute to our families and society? As a result of restorative justice, I have witnessed both survivors and former offenders become positive role models and productive citizens both in and outside of prison. I have observed offenders dedicate their lives to making positive difference in the lives of their former victims and survivors and their families. And as unthinkable as it might seem, I have witnessed firsthand survivors and offenders hug and laugh as they appear to have transcended wrongdoing that once connected them in a very negative way into a healthy and positive relationship. Repeatedly, I have heard and seen how restorative justice positively and effectively transforms lives for the better. And I have been amazed. It gives me hope and helps me see through a different lens how much better our criminal justice system could be overall if restorative justice was more entrenched. And it inspires me to continue to advocate for change. So what is restorative justice? Restorative justice is a philosophy or theory of justice that invites a fundamental shift in the way we think about and do justice. It is a model that has proven to be very effective in resolving conflict and trauma and in restoring people and communities. Based on ancient and biblical tenets, as well as on indigenous and aboriginal practices of communities in Africa, New Zealand, South America, and Asia, contemporary restorative justice emerged in North America in the 1970s. In his little book of restorative justice, Howard Zehr, known as the grandfather and founder of contemporary restorative justice, identifies 3 pillars of restorative justice. He says that restorative justice, and this is a quote, restorative justice is a process to involve those who have a stake in a specific offense, collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things right to the extent possible, end quote. This is done through a process of engagement of the stakeholders. Zehr explains that restorative justice is a philosophy that requires a different paradigm shift in our thinking. It is a theory of justice that challenges our fundamental assumptions in the dominant discourse about justice. Restorative justice empowers victims and encourages offenders who have caused harm to take responsibility for the harm they have caused, to acknowledge the impact of what they have done, and it permits them to be held and to hold themselves accountable without feeling condemned. The process of engagement of the stakeholders is voluntary and is facilitated by trained restorative justice facilitators. The process is undergirded by the values of respect and honesty. Victims and survivors may participate individually or through a surrogate, and they have a central voice in how to repair the harm. They participate in intense restorative dialogue in a safe space that allows them to share and tell their stories of being harmed, to ask questions of an offender who caused the harm, and to explain a crime's impact or the impact that a crime had on them. Stakeholders are encouraged to listen deeply and share honestly from the heart. Offenders get to understand the extent to which their wrongdoing has affected their victims and others. And victims learn more about the person responsible for causing them harm. In restorative justice, key decisions are made by stakeholders who are the most affected. The process is empowering and transformative. Depending on the nature of the crime, victims become survivors. Offenders take responsibility for their wrongdoing and hold themselves accountable. perhaps for the first time. Through the restorative process, they can develop true empathy and remorse, which transforms them and reduces the likelihood of their recidivating and causing harm to others in the future. By addressing harm's needs and obligations to repair harm and providing a process for all concerned to engage and discuss how to repair the harm and put things right, restorative justice processes get to the root causes of why a crime is committed and pave the way for healing of victims, offenders, their families, and communities, so they can all begin to live productively in society. Our criminal justice system in America is a retributive justice system that is based on Old Testament biblical notions of retaliation. In our retributive justice system, we ask 3 questions. 1, what law was broken? 2, who broke it? And 3, what punishment is deserved? At its core is the principle of equal retribution as expressed in Exodus 21:23-27, an eye for an eye. The central focus is punishment and harm by the state that is inflicted on the offender. So the offender gets what he or she deserves, and it is justified in terms of deterrence, incapacitation, and retribution. The victim, their family, and their community are largely left on the sidelines of the adversarial process without much, if any, input beyond their testimony in the state's case. On the contrary, restorative justice asks 3 different questions. Who was harmed? What are the harms and needs, responsibilities of all affected that have been revealed by the harm? And who is responsible for repairing the harm? The central focus is healing and how to repair harm to put things right, to the extent possible. Restorative justice is more balanced in that it also focuses on addressing the needs of everyone affected. All stakeholders have a voice, and the process is inclusive and non-adversarial. Crime disempowers its victims, but utilizing restorative justice empowers victims, their families, and communities. It can empower offenders also. Restorative justice seeks to serve peace and reparation to all parties involved within an incident, bringing together the person who caused harm with the person harmed, along with community members in a respectful encounter, and being able to ask questions and receive honest answers allows victims to receive details and information about the crime that they may not have had and that only the offender can provide. Victims can learn from offenders that they did nothing to contribute to their being victimized and they are not at fault. This often helps them reach a sense of closure that enables them to begin to move on with their lives. Juxtapose this with what happens in our retributive justice system, wherein a person pleads not guilty, thereby triggering the adversarial process and the requirement that the state prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In our retributive system, an accused offender does not have to answer any questions of the victim. And the only time he or she answers questions is if he or she chooses to testify. The offender is supported in not being accountable on his or her own volition. There is no communication or other interaction permitted between the accused and the victim. And the attorneys for the state and for the offender do most of the talking, each side seeking to win. Depending on the severity of the harm involved, there are 3 primary restorative justice modalities that may be implemented or utilized singularly or in combination with other modalities. They are victim offender conferences, or VOC. They usually have 1 facilitator. Family group conferences, which also have one facilitator and possibly a co-facilitator, depending on the size of the group. And there are peacemaking circles, or circles of support and accountability, also known as COSAs. They usually have one keeper, circle keeper, but may have one or more co-keepers in addition, depending on the size of the group. Stakeholders are prepared for restorative processes by the trained restorative justice facilitators. The facilitator meets separately with the victim and offender on many occasions to build trust and answer questions. The facilitator spends hours, days, weeks, months, and sometimes years preparing stakeholders in order to assess and facilitate the stakeholders' readiness to eventually come together for engagement. The duration of a restorative justice conference or circle can vary, but studies show that even a 2 to 3 hour healing or peacemaking circle, victim-offender dialogue, or family group community conference can help those who have been harmed experience dramatic improvements in their conditions. Any agreements reached for repairing harm are reduced to writing, and the facilitator follows up with the stakeholders to ensure that offenders and all who are responsible for repairing the harm follow through with their commitments. I was first introduced to restorative justice in 2007. At that time, I was serving as the presiding judge of the juvenile court of the Alameda County Superior Court. I attended an informational presentation about restorative justice given by an Oakland nonprofit called Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, or RJOY. At that time, RJOY was headed by Dr. Fania Davis, who is here tonight, a lawyer and PhD in Indigenous Studies, who was the executive director and co-founder. Impressed with what I heard, I quickly understood that restorative justice could address many shortcomings that I had seen over decades as a lawyer and a judge in our retributive justice system. Shortly thereafter, I convened a restorative justice task force and engaged a wide network of juvenile justice stakeholders. We met monthly for over a year to further educate ourselves about the principles and practices of restorative justice. We envisioned county-wide use of restorative justice practices which emphasized repairing harm caused by youthful wrongdoing while reducing the financial and social costs of our juvenile justice system. We wanted to collaborate with and meaningfully engage victims, youth, their families, and communities in restorative processes, which would fundamentally change the way we responded to youthful wrongdoing by focusing on the needs of victims, community safety, and youth accountability. We also envisioned the institutionalization of evidence-based restorative justice principles and practices throughout Alameda County, juvenile justice system, and the dependency systems, our schools, and youth-serving community organizations to more effectively address wrongdoing and its associated mental health and behavioral issues. Subcommittees laid the groundwork for pilot applications of restorative justice, including diverting youth away from the system, community-based sentencing alternatives, and circles of support and accountability for youth re-entering schools and communities after a period of incarceration. 1 year later, in the fall of 2008, the Restorative Justice Task Force conducted a 2-day strategic planning session with more than 40 stakeholders from the public and private sectors who came together and began charting the way for system-wide implementation of restorative justice processes throughout Alameda County. From that effort, a 3-year restorative justice strategic plan was developed, and it became effective in 2009. Numerous restorative pilots were implemented, and the juvenile court collaborated with the justice partners, community-based organizations, and schools to carry out implementation. Intensive trainings in restorative conferencing models were scheduled and trained. Restorative justice were scheduled, and trained restorative justice facilitators were identified to facilitate them. Much was accomplished with the implementation of the strategic plan from 2009 to 2012 and beyond. Alameda County's implementation of restorative justice practices took off, and we became a model to other counties who became interested in replicating what we were doing. Public and private sector funding on the local, state, and federal levels began to open up and became available for restorative justice programming. The Oakland and Berkeley Unified School Districts passed restorative justice resolutions, respectively, committing to the utilization of restorative justice processes in addressing school discipline, which has continued to the present time. And the use of RJ processes in schools has resulted in significant reductions in suspensions and dismissals and significant diminishment of the school-to-prison pipeline. In 2011, due to our successful efforts, the Oakland City Council passed a restorative justice resolution declaring the second week of October 2011 and of every year thereafter as Restorative Justice Week in the city of Oakland. Today, we see restorative justice programming being utilized not just in Alameda County, but throughout the country. Even so, currently, there is still much more to do to bring restorative justice to scale so that it becomes part of the dominant discourse and entrenched as a way of doing justice, like our attributive system is. Since being introduced to restorative justice in 2007, I have learned that it is not some touchy-feely, head in the clouds type of justice. It is a way of responding relationally to wrongdoing in our criminal justice system, our schools, communities, workplaces, and homes. However, it is not an easy justice. It is hard work, but with very rewarding outcomes. Restorative justice is values-driven in that its primary values are respect, healing, transformation, interconnectedness, accountability, putting things right, and creating the space where reconciliation and possibly forgiveness may occur. It includes the value of Ubuntu, a South African Bantu term meaning humanity towards others, sometimes translated as, I am because you are. Contrary to what some may believe, restorative justice does not give a pass that allows offenders to escape responsibility for their wrongdoing or lets them off easy. No, restorative justice not only holds offenders accountable, but requires them to unequivocally take responsibility for the harm they caused by admitting their wrongdoing and being accountable by taking steps to repair the harm to the extent possible. Restorative justice embodies a process of truth and honesty and does not allow an offender to re-victimize a victim by being dishonest and not forthright, nor does it allow a victim to beat up on an offender. However, it is a process that can and does contain anger, hurt, frustration, sorrow, outrage, and tears. Restorative justice facilitates the healing process of long-term psychological and emotional scars that result from incidents of crime and victimization, which often last for months, years, and even for a lifetime. The humanizing effect of restorative justice processes often allows victims who meet with a person who caused them harm to see him or her as a human being rather than as a monster. Likewise, offenders can see the victim as a human being rather than as prey. And although forgiveness is not the goal of restorative justice, it can and does happen. And when it does, it is amazing. Studies show that victims and offenders who participate in restorative processes have greater satisfaction and regard for our criminal justice system. The harm caused by crime does not only impact individual victims, but reverberates and negatively impacts everyone who is connected to the victim and to the offender. So it is critical, a critical component of restorative justice, that offenders are informed about the harm they have caused. This is important and necessary to holding offenders accountable and having them understand the extent of the harm they inflicted on their victims. We cannot expect offenders to know the degree of feelings of loss, despair, confusion, shame, neglect, helplessness, and anger that victims and their families have unless they are confronted with it. Without this component, there can be no accountability, and the pathology will continue. Although I strongly believe in restorative justice, I also believe that our retributive justice system does have a place for very serious crimes, and that punishment and discipline to address a person's criminal wrongdoing has its place and can be appropriate. I also believe that the reasons for crime do not and should not absolve or mitigate the crime to the extent that there are no consequences. However, I do think knowing the reasons or motivation for why one commits a crime and causes harm might possibly explain their actions. But nonetheless, an offender should be held accountable for what he or she did. Even so, at some point, there should be room for an offender's restoration, if possible. I say if possible because to begin a process of restoration, an offender must sincerely take responsibility for causing harm and be accountable for repairing the harm and putting things right. Even people sentenced to life imprisonment for their crimes should have an opportunity to repent and be restored while continuing to serve their sentence. As a Christian, I believe that God redeems and restores us when we fall short and we sin. We still suffer the consequences. We do not escape the consequences of our iniquity. But when we confess and repent, God shows us mercy and unmerited grace, and He redeems and He restores us. I believe that is what our goals should be in our criminal justice system, and I believe that is what restorative justice can also offer. The ability to be restored and rehabilitated while being accountable is one of the attributes of restorative justice that has strongly resonated with me over the years, especially as I have witnessed incarcerated lifers at San Quentin change their lives by participating in restorative processes that made them whole and helped them become productive and law-abiding individuals while serving life sentences. In the aftermath of tragedy, such as a serious crime being committed, I believe restorative justice processes can be utilized to provide safe spaces where victims, their families, and communities can come together to process their grief, despair, and hurt. We know that those who have been murdered cannot be brought back to life. Nonetheless, the use of restorative justice processes for their families and others who have been harmed has the potential to empower, heal, transform, and restore those who were left behind. Many studies affirm restorative justice as an effective evidence-based modality in treating psychological and emotional trauma suffered by victims of crime. One such study was conducted by Dr. Caroline Angel, a psychiatric nurse and lecturer in criminology at the University of Pennsylvania, who holds dual PhD degrees in nursing and criminology from that institution. In an article written by Abby J. Porter in 2006 and published in the International Institute for Restorative Practices e-Forum publication, Ms. Porter focused on an experimental clinical analysis and study conducted by Dr. Angel regarding the effectiveness of restorative justice in treating symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome in crime victims who had met their offenders face-to-face in a restorative justice conference. Dr. Angel had focused on a group of subjects in London, England, who had been victims of the crimes of burglary and robbery. The victims were randomly assigned to a test group which participated in a restorative conference, or to a control group which proceeded through the conventional retributive criminal justice process. Interviews were conducted before the study ensued to determine the symptoms and the frequency of symptoms victims experienced. Additional interviews were conducted to assess their levels of psychological stress 6 weeks and 6 months following the conferences to measure their symptoms of PTSD. Symptoms the victims experienced because of incidents of crime included intrusive memories of the crime, flashbacks, difficulty sleeping, and feelings of anger and physical symptoms. The findings demonstrated that for the subjects who participated in restorative conferencing, their symptoms of PTSD were significantly reduced compared to the control group that participated in conventional criminal justice proceedings. At the 6-week interview, the restorative conference group subjects experienced 1/3 fewer PTSD symptoms. At the interview 6 months later, findings revealed the subjects who had participated in the restorative conference maintained a significantly lower level of PTSD symptoms of 40% fewer symptoms compared to the control group. These findings are considered significant because only a small percentage of crime victims who suffer psychological distress, seek out or receive professional help. As a result, many who are psychologically and emotionally wounded from incidents of crime walk around as ticking time bombs to themselves and to others because left untreated, PTSD not only causes pain and suffering for victims and their families, their friends, and other loved ones, but can also contribute to serious and debilitating health problems and loss of productivity. The findings further demonstrated that restorative conferences help many victims to overcome their fears and to attain a sense of closure. Finally, the findings suggest that restorative conferences include all the components of a successful trauma treatment program and can be used as a therapeutic behavioral intervention modality to reduce the psychological and emotional effects of trauma. This is an example that restorative justice processes can be effective in several settings, including clinical settings. As a Christian, I believe that every person is made in the image and likeness of God, and that in God's sight, we all have value and worth. Thus, we all have the human right to be treated with fundamental dignity. When a crime is committed and a victim is harmed, their dignity, basic human rights to life, security, property, and the pursuit of happiness is violated. Likewise, while offenders are responsible for the harm they have caused, they also have basic human rights to be treated with fundamental dignity. No one's human rights are paramount over another. In restorative justice culture, the basic human rights of victims and offenders are respected, but offenders are and must still be held accountable. Because we are all interconnected, we are responsible to each other. Restorative justice affirms our interconnectedness, addresses and reinforces Christian tenets of responsibility and accountability, but also addresses and promotes healing and redemption. Restorative justice is a justice that seeks to restore broken lives, broken relationships, and broken communities while ensuring responsibility and accountability. It seeks to put things right to the extent possible, as opposed to a justice that simply addresses pain by inflicting more pain upon wrongdoers. Restorative justice is a justice that rights wrongs and puts things right by seeking reconciliation rather than adversarial conflict. It is a justice that is restorative and healing rather than retributive. In conclusion, the book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8 of the Bible, and in the book of Micah, if I didn't say that, the prophet Micah tells us what God requires us to do, that we are called to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Thus, we as believers are called to protect and promote our fundamental human rights, to repair broken relationships with love, and to be accountable to a justice that restores. I believe that restorative justice can help us fulfill that calling. Thank you. and God bless you. I think I'm okay. Let me move out of the way. I turned it off.
Let's give Judge Bereola a round of applause. Absolutely amazing. We have time for just a few questions. And if you have a question, and if you walk toward me, in fact, if you would just come to me, I'll let you speak in this microphone, and then we'll have Judge Bereola to address it. Is there anyone with any questions here tonight?
I see a hand back.
Just ask you to state your name and your background.
Yes, Your Honor. Robert Oliver. I don't know if I've appeared before you, but I've had a couple of juveniles that I've dealt with. I'm usually a facility administrator for several group homes in the Bay Area, and I'm familiar with restorative justice. I did have one question. You mentioned property crimes in regards to the application of restorative justice. I was wondering about applying that to crimes, some crimes against persons, maybe in the area of human trafficking, or maybe even in some juvenile assault cases. But then I started wondering about issues of maybe discovery, because if you're gonna, say, enter into a conversation, a therapeutic conversation in regards to restorative justice, how would that work? Would you have to suspend, certain things that were mentioned or offered during a discussion like that? I hope I'm asking this question correctly.
So let me just make sure that I understand, Mr. Oliver. So in listening to you, what you seem to be asking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you seem to be asking that if someone participates, if there was human trafficking or property crimes or crimes to the person, if someone participates in a restorative justice process, is that confidential? Or is that going to, what is discussed, going to need to be revealed, and can it be discovered, what was said, that is, by others?
Or are we there yet in applying restorative justice to situations like that? I don't know.
So it is possible, well, generally, restorative justice processes are confidential, but it is possible that if one is in the criminal or retributive justice system and going through that process, and then perhaps also engages in a restorative process, others will hear about it and will want to know and what was said. And for example, there might be a probation officer that's involved if you're talking about a youth. And then if the youth is participating in restorative practices, the probation officer may want to know what is said. When I was the juvenile court presiding judge, what I did is I made sure when we were rolling out the pilots that everything stayed confidential. So I actually signed standing orders about the confidentiality of proceedings so that that information could not be used against people. Because it is possible that someone may want to participate in a restorative justice process and they want to admit responsibility and take responsibility and be accountable, but it might be different in the retributive system of justice, where maybe they pled not guilty, and now here they are over here in this other process. Hopefully, though, those two can be reconciled as time goes on. In other words, if there was more programming within the retributive justice system that allowed for restorative justice processes to be utilized, someone could come into the system and, instead of pleading not guilty, end up in a restorative process. So the restorative process would take hold in terms of what should happen. The court could still monitor it. In fact, when we had some of our pilot cases back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2009, 2010, before I left the juvenile court, that's what I did. I knew that certain youth were participating in some of these pilots. I knew that things were going to be said, and that information was not allowed to be used against them in court. But fortunately, we had the DA. One of the DAs at that time was Matthew Gold. And although it took some convincing, after a while, he became a proponent of restorative justice and started referring cases to restorative justice for restorative justice processing, and understood that it was important that what was said in the restorative justice process, whether it was a family group conference or whether it was a victim-offender dialogue, that it stayed there. Because there was trust, implicit trust, as time went on, that the restorative process was going to repair the harm and work things out. And so there was no need to be concerned about what was being said in order to be able to use that in the criminal justice retributive system. So that was a long way of saying that in general, proceedings are confidential, but I understand the concern that something could get out or get back, and that's because we still have a lot of work to do to try to make sure that the systems are working together so that if we're going to have restorative justice, that it's understood that it may be used to augment and maybe enhance the retributive justice system, but they're not to be juxtaposed to one another, where you can end up using restorative processes in order to try to convict someone in the retributive process.
And we have time for one more question.
Hello, everyone. Let me get here so I can be on camera as well. Judge Gail Bereola, you know who I am. I am Reverend Alexandria, and I am a juvenile chaplain in Contra Costa County. And there we serve with spiritual care volunteers and mentors working with the youth. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing with restorative justice and the work you have done. 15 years later, Contra Costa County is now taking your model and trying and working to implement it. And that's wonderful. We just had a stakeholders meeting about 2 weeks ago, and I was worried initially. I don't know if this is more a question or comment or just engagement, excitement. I was worried about the involvement of the word offender, victim, harm giver, harm receiver feels a bit more calmer to me. But I was really worried about the pre-work that's done, because juveniles, working with them as a chaplain, I've learned how difficult it can be to talk about their honesty and be authentic about the harm they've caused and be able to come to a circle. And hearing about the days, weeks, and months that facilitators prepare with our youth gives joy and comfort, because a lot of them, as you know, are offenders, but they're victims themselves of a lot of harm and communal activity and neglect and things that they just have not received. And so I'm really grateful to hear that and to let you know that we have just opened a position for a restorative justice chaplain to continue that model and continue your work forward. And so I'm grateful to you for that.
Let's give both our questioner as well as our commenter a wonderful hand for sharing their information. Thank you very much. We are now going to at least end this formalized program. There's time for us to engage with one another. We have our step, what do you call that? A step and something? Step and repeat. Step and repeat. You know, I've stood in front of step and repeats, but I can never repeat the steps of what it is. But you know what it is. And you may want to greet Judge Bereola and offer your appreciation. I did want to simply do this because I didn't do it before, and I wanted to recognize our fellow clergy who are here. There are several ministers of the gospel here, and I would ask you to stand so that we can recognize the ministers of the gospel. Thank you. I'll take liberty to say that you will be instrumental in our capacity to take what we do and have it implemented in your parish, your church, your area of influence, circle of influence. A lot of the work that we do will greatly depend on your affirmation and approval and your application thereof. So God bless you, and thank you all for being here. Once again, can we give a round of applause for Judge Bereola? In fact, Matthew, if the tape is a quality that I believe it's going to be, we're going to get this thing on C-SPAN, y'all. She need to be on C-SPAN. But that's appreciation. Lastly, now, I would like to ask that Dean Leanne Snowflesher will come and offer benediction. And I want to also thank her. She has been very instrumental in the work that we're doing here at BST in respect to the restorative justice process and more narrowly to the center for which we are standing up. Would you please give a round of applause as we hear benediction for Dr. Flesher.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. I am going to begin with the verse, the scripture text that you ended with, which is Micah 6:8. And I want you to hear that it is from the 8th century BCE. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Also from Amos, chapter 5, verses 23 and 24, also 8th century BCE. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. 1,000 years later, Matthew, in chapter 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You pay tithes of mint and dill and cumin, but you have disgraced the weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. 1,000 years after that, we move to the medieval era. And in a thesis written by Patricia McCune, she notes this: the medieval literature reveals an ideology of mercy. Reconciliation must be preferred to retribution as the means for keeping order. But in early 16th century literature, this reversed. The strict letter of the law must be enforced for the good of the individual soul and the commonwealth. 500 years later, in the executive summary of the Sentencing Project Report, which got laid on my desk today by Dr. Evans. Thank you, Dr. Evans. The opening paragraph says this: following a massive 4-decade-long buildup of incarceration disproportionately impacting people of color, a growing reform movement has made important inroads. The 21st century has witnessed progress both in reducing the U.S. prison population and its racial and ethnic disparities. Despite this progress, imprisonment levels remain too high nationwide, particularly for Black Americans. Humanity has struggled for thousands of years to find a balance between justice and mercy. Please stand with me now as we hear the benediction. May we take the words of our hearing this evening and apply them to the deeds of our doing as we move forward. Remembering the words of Jesus that we find in Matthew 5 in his Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. May we leave this evening with prayers on our lips and hope in our hearts for a better day and a better way. Amen. Go with God.